You're going to have a good time right now because I got with me here one of the most famous, not just makeup artists, directors, characters, personalities. And we've been working on doing this show for years, and we thought, what better place to do it than live in front of all of you here at Spooky Empire. Please welcome the great Greg Nicotero. Mic drop. Is it under the seat? Oh, here it is. You have to do it on the floor, Greg, is what we're doing.
Hey, everybody.
Here we go. All right, man. Yeah, we've been preparing this for a long time, talking back and forth about doing this, right?
Finally. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, it's been a pretty great weekend.
It really has, yeah.
I love this show.
It's funny, as a horror fan, you were mentioning that your table was kind of over in the corner, but you're right beside Tom Savini, and I see the two of you talking. I know obviously you're friends or whatever, but it's really cool to see two of the all-time greats, I might even say the greatest of all time, between the two of you having a conversation and kind of reconnecting after all these years.
Yeah, I met Tom when I was 18, I think. So we've been friends for 43 years. And you know, it's his fault that I'm doing what I'm doing, him and George Romero. Because, you know, I met Tom and it was when they were shooting Creepshow, because George Romero was like the kind of guy who would say, hey, do you want a job? And that's how he has his family, his crew was always like that. So they were prepping Creepshow and he's like, hey, do you want a job? And I was like, really? But then I couldn't because I was getting ready to go away to college. And, but he said, just come visit. And I would go on Saturdays because I was in high school. I'd go Saturdays. And Tom, the first time I met Savini, he was in the gymnasium in the little corner office where his lab was. And I used to go on Saturdays and hang out while he was building Fluffy from Creepshow and all this stuff. So I was just a fly on the wall. Like, that would never happen today.
Right.
Never happened. My career literally was being at the right place at the right time. And just, I always say, I would always have that little highway, and I was like, what decision should I do? Should I do Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, or should I do Evil Dead 2? And I chose to do Evil Dead 2, and Tom was pissed at me for a while, but that was the first show that I did with Bob Kurtzman and Howard Berger, and K&B was born basically from Evil Dead 2. So I've always considered myself really lucky that when I had those little forks in the road, that I always chose the right one, because
so when you
have been very different.
When you're growing up in Pittsburgh and you have Tom Savini and George Romero saying, just come on by, were you already building your own effects? Were you already interested in doing special effects and makeup, etc.?
I loved it, but it was a hobby. I mean, that's why I always encourage people that come up to my table. I'm like, follow your passion. Because, you know, it's more and more challenging now with CGI and AI, and people are like, what? I really want to be a makeup effects person. And, you know, the thing I will always say to them is, be well-rounded, like know how to do straight makeup and know how to do bruises and know how to do trauma makeups. Be the whole package. So when a producer looks at your portfolio, they see a little bit of everything. You know, so I grew up reading Famous Monsters magazine. I remember buying Fangoria issue number 1 at a convention in Pittsburgh when Dawn of the Dead had just come out. And there was a guy there selling props from Dawn of the Dead. It was like a rubber hand for $1,000. And I was like, I was so bummed because it was like, you know, the zombie hands that were smashed in the Monroeville Mall doors and they would lock them and you'd see the little blowtorch. All that stuff was there. And I just thought, oh, how cool would it be? But I was always just a fan, you know. I grew up, I don't know how many, it's hard to see, but a lot of you older people probably remember like Castle Films, where you would get the Super 8 digest, and it was like 8 minutes, and you would project it on a sheet on the wall, and you would watch Frankenstein and the Wolfman and Dracula.
Right.
I still have all of my movies, and you'd get to the very end, and then you'd put it in reverse, and you'd watch the creature jump out of the water and onto the boat. So I was like just obsessed with monsters, and I was so scared when I was a little kid. I would watch the scariest shit, and then I would be so afraid of having nightmares because my imagination was really crazy that I would like stay up I wouldn't sleep because I was afraid to go to sleep because I thought I was going to have really, really bad nightmares.
Right.
But I would just watch the worst most scary things that you could remember. And then I just became fascinated. My parents were like, what the hell's wrong with you? I was like, I don't know, I just love it. I love being scared. But then I'd lay in bed like, when I was little. Now I'm fine, nothing scares me now.
So when you finally do get started, it was with Romero. It was Day of the Dead, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was your first project ever?
Yeah.
That's
well,
crazy.
no, actually, so here was the thing, and I was saying about George earlier. George is the kind of guy that was like, hey, man, you should come hang out or come work on the show or whatever. So when I met Tom, we got to be friends. They had shot Creepshow, and then Tom directed Inside the Closet for Tales from the Dark Side. And he made the little Lizzie puppet. And I remember him saying, yeah, we're shooting in New York. And I convinced my parents that we should go on a trip to New York for the weekend and spend a week there. And we did. They're like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. The only reason I wanted to go to New York was because Tom was filming and I wanted to go. So we get up there and I'm like, hey, Mom and Dad, I'm going to go to Long Island City. And they're like, what? How do you even know where Long Island City is? You're just a kid. But I went and hung out for like 3 or 4 days and I puppeteered on Lizzie and I helped Tom. So that was and that was in June of '84. So that was the first time that I had ever been on a movie set and like looked around and like saw the cameras and the lights and Fritz Weaver was in it, who was in Creepshow. So I was like, that's the guy from Creepshow. And then we went back to Pittsburgh, and then in July I went down to have lunch with George. And George is like, hey, we got a green light on Day of the Dead. Do you want a job? And I'm like, okay, I already said no for Creepshow 4 years ago or 3 years ago. So I'm not going to say no. I'm like, yes, I'll take it. Then I drove home, called Savini and said, hey, I just got hired on Day of the Dead. I want to be your assistant. I mean, I didn't really know anything about practical makeup effects except stuff I'd read in Fangoria or Famous Monsters. And then I went to my parents and I said, hey, so I'm going to take a semester off school. I just put this medical school pre-med thing on hold for a little bit. And they were like, you got to, my parents were so smart about it because they basically said, you got a good head on your shoulders. You're not stupid. So if you want to take a semester off school, we'll just see where that takes you. And I was like, woohoo. So then I called Tom. I said, I got hired. I want to be your assistant. Boom, boom. And then I was working at Tom's house. And my job was to collect resumes and order all the materials and supplies. And so I just went head first into learning everything about all the companies, where we had to order foam latex from and where we had to get the stuff to make all the molds. And I looked through the resumes and helped pick the crew. Said, this guy looks kind of cool. We should maybe talk to him. And it was, I still remember like it was yesterday. Like, I don't know what I had for breakfast today, but I can remember like working in Tom's garage for 3 months and how fun it was. It was just, and I just thought it was like, I'll do this one movie and I'll go back and be a doctor. And
40 years later, here you are.
Yeah, 40 years. Day of the Dead's 40 years this
year.
What
What did you learn from Tom Savini and from George Romero? Because obviously you're a young guy, very new to the whole situation, and Tom is already has built such a resume, and George Romero has already done some of the most classic horror movies ever. Were you picking up as a young guy certain things from them?
You pick up everything when you're in a situation like that. It was like I was just absorbing everything around me. I remember reading the original script for Day of the Dead, and those of you that have heard the story. The script was originally much longer. A lot of what ended up in Land of the Dead was actually in the original Day of the Dead script, because it takes place in Florida, and these people are on a boat, and they go out to this island, and the island is inhabited by this dictator named Gasparilla, and he's basically running the island and feeding flesh to zombies to make an army. And then there's this underground group of revolutionaries who were trying to overthrow him. And it was like this super crazy action, really great. I loved it. It was like, I went, oh my God, this is gonna be the coolest movie ever. And then they said, well, we don't have the money to make that version, because George wanted an unrated film. And the finance people said, well, we're not gonna give you $7 million to make an unrated movie. We'll give you $3 million. So we had to cut the script down. So the Day of the Dead that everybody has seen is a very pared down version. But I remember the original script and all the stuff. It was so cool and so interesting. So So the first thing I learned is like, oh, well, now we're stripping out a lot of the stuff that we love. And, you know, any director, any writer will tell you, like, that's, you know, you're killing your babies, you know. You're literally taking all these great things that you agonized over writing. And I know George always said that this was his favorite of the Dead movies. But for me, it's a little bittersweet because I read the original script of what it was supposed to be. Like, there was a character that they were smuggling nitroglycerin into the military guy's compound to blow it up. So there was a character, and they made incisions in her body, and they slid the nitroglycerin vials under her skin to sneak her in. And then at the end of the movie, one of the zombies bites her and comes back and has a vial in its mouth of nitroglycerin, and the zombie's like, and just throws it, and the whole place blows up. So it was stuff like that, you know, that I always was a little sad about Day of the Dead because I knew what George's original intention was for that movie. It's still a great movie, but that was the, you know, the low budget. So I think that was one of the first things I learned of like, oh man, you know, if you can't afford to. Even when we shot the Fort Myers stuff, we shot that right before Christmas. I begged George to bring the armorer and the gun guy, because originally there was this big shootout in Fort Myers, and the people got on the boat, and then they're in the boat going out to the island, and there's like bloated zombies in the water, and I was like, oh my God, I begged him, just bring some guns so we can. I kept thinking maybe in the back of my mind that we would shoot that stuff, but you know.
You mentioned that you chose between Texas Chainsaw 2 and Evil Dead 2. Yeah. And you mentioned that Tom was angry at you for choosing Evil Dead 2. Why was that?
Well, look, I mean, after Day of the Dead, we did Halloween Candy, which was Tom's second Dark Side, Invasion USA. So I was sort of like stayed on as Tom's assistant and was working on stuff. And then what ended up happening is I was like, well, Tom didn't need to work all the time. He was picking and choosing his projects. So at one point I'm like, dude, I gotta work. I gotta do something. So I moved to LA to work on Evil Dead 2. And then he called me and said, okay, chainsaw's up, let's go. And I'm like, I can't, I already committed. And I think it was just because he wanted me there to be part of that crew. He really wanted me to sort of run the department for him. And that was one of the big things that sort of ingratiated me to George Romero and Richard Rubenstein was like, Tom had never had an assistant that basically handled all the affairs of the department, like the supplies and dealing with production. And the idea was I would do all that stuff, and that kept Tom free to design the effects and be creative. And on Day of the Dead, everybody said, this is the best work Tom's ever done because he was able to concentrate solely on the effects stuff. He didn't have to worry about doing the script breakdowns and the storyboard stuff and shot lists and all that kind of stuff. I did all that stuff for him. So he was disappointed that I didn't leave. But at that point, I had made relationships in Los Angeles, and I was thinking, okay, if I want to keep going. I still ended up eventually going back to do Monkey Shines the following year. But it was Evil Dead 2, and then I went right from Evil Dead 2 to Creepshow 2, because the same producers were like, we need Nicotero in here because he did a great job on Day of the Dead.
So when you become the lead effects artist on Evil Dead 2, like what was some of the earlier big effects that you did that you're very proud of?
Well, that show, Evil Dead 2 really, one thing I got to say is, when I worked for Tom, he had a video camera with him all the time. He had a VHS camcorder, and he shot everything. And my dad is a big tech guy too, so we had a beta cam where you'd stick the tape in the cam and you just film it. So a lot of my job on Day of the Dead was documenting everything as well. So if you watch any of the making of stuff, that's all footage that I was shooting. So when we got to do Evil Dead 2, we all shot in this Wadesboro, South Carolina, this little town. And I had a camera with me all the time, and I documented everything. I filmed Bruce shooting his scenes, and I filmed Sam. And what I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that's all on the DVD. And it's probably the closest that you'll ever come to knowing what it was really like to be on that movie, because you're a fly on the wall. I was filming the entire time. Now, I had seen the original Evil Dead, and I always used to think to myself, if that movie had great, great makeup effects, like if Dick Smith had been hired to do Evil Dead, it probably would have been one of the most terrifying movies ever made. The effects, obviously, because they didn't have a lot of money, were a little cheaper than you would have imagined. But I kept thinking to myself, God, if they had Dick Smith or somebody that caliber doing the effects for Evil Dead, it would have been relentless and terrifying. So we do Evil Dead 2, and I'm reading the script, and I'm thinking, okay, this stuff's going to be relentless and terrifying. And then I remember getting new pages, and there was a scene where Ash is in the work shed, and the door flies open, and it's Linda's headless corpse coming in with the chainsaw, and comes in. And I read that in the script, and I'm like, this is so cool. Like a headless corpse with a chainsaw. So then we start building stuff, and we get on set, and Howard Berger I think Howard was laying on the little creeper dolly, puppeteering that. I think one of us was above, operating the hands and the chainsaw. And then when we shot the scene, the door flies open, and it's like a little Muppet with the chainsaw. And then, Bruce hits it with the crowbar, and the chainsaw comes, black. It's all the Bruce slapsticky stuff that was so funny. And I'm kind of like, is this the same scene I read? Like this terrifying, horrifying. And then I realized it's a lot of Sam's gags were like Three Stooges gags. Like the eyeball flyball gag where Billy Joe spits out the eyeball. That's like from a Three Stooges episode. Yeah. So I realized like maybe a quarter of the way through that we weren't shooting this masterful horror opus, but that we were shooting something that Sam was a lot more seasoned in his directing, and he was playing with a bunch of different genres. And, Scott Spiegel, who just passed away, Scotty wrote a lot of that stuff. And, a lot of people don't realize, but Scott, he was a big influence on the way Sam directed, because Scott was really, really into the slapsticky Stooges stuff. And Scott was the guy who introduced Quentin Tarantino to Lawrence Bender, and us to Quentin Tarantino. So when we went to his memorial, Quentin's like, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Scott Spiegel. And I said, K&B wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Scott Spiegel, because our first job was Intruder, which was Scotty's first directorial debut after Evil Dead. So I'm jumping around a little bit, but the point was, I realized at some point that like Sam had a really unique style and a unique voice, and it wasn't intended to be super horrifying. It was intended to be a little outrageous. So, when we shot the blood flood stuff, and there were literally fire hoses of bile shooting onto the set, it was just so crazy. And knowing the impact that movie had on people, still to this day, is, something that makes me proud that not only was I there, but I unwittingly documented the making of that movie for everybody to see. And that makes me really proud, because I love that people are inspired by it. You watch the behind the scenes of Evil Dead 2, and that's it. I mean, it makes you want to go make movies.
Was there ever anything in a script, like you mentioned reading Linda's headless body, was there ever anything that you read in a script where you're thinking, I don't know how I'm going to do this. This is going to be really hard to figure this one out?
No, because it really was kind of like a student film.
I mean, in any of the films you've done.
Oh, in any of the films. That's a really interesting question, because the first meeting that you have on any movie is the one where you're not worrying about budget, you're not worrying about schedule, you're just sitting with the director, and you hear what the director wants to do. And then your job is to walk away and figure it out. I will give you one analogy, though, that I love this story. When we were doing a movie called Eraser, Arnold Schwarzenegger, James Caan, there's a scene where Arnold's being chased by the bad guys, and he runs into this alligator compound. And there's these big terrarium things filled with alligators. And, the bad guys are coming in, and Arnold shoots the glass out, and the alligators come out and eat everybody. So we did that right after From Dusk Till Dawn. And the thing was, we had to build these like 14-foot and 9-foot alligators. We built two kinds. One that was self-contained, so you'd fill up the air bottles and you'd push the button and the tail would move and they would swim around. They would swim. So then when we shot the glass, they would all pour out. Once they're out, now we're in the set, and we were showing the director, Chuck Russell, along the way, like, okay, this is what it can do. They're hydraulic. They were like the Violator from Spawn. So, the head can move side to side, up and down. They weigh about 800 pounds each. The one thing they won't be able to do is walk, but the tails move, the heads move. We even made a little cage in the mouth so that we didn't crush the stunt guy's head with the hydraulic stuff. Anyway, so we get the set. We bring all the alligators in. We line them all up. The director comes over first thing and goes, okay, so first shot, I want the alligator to walk from there to there. And he turned and walked away. And I'm like, what are we going to, how are we going to? And I think part of my reputation is that I've never said no to a director. I'm like, all right, I just got to give him something. I got to figure this out. Now, the alligators did have cables in the arms, so the arms could do this. So it was like me and 2 or 3 other guys were like, okay, what if we get one of those creeper dollies that people use when they slide underneath cars to work on them? And we'll just put the alligator on the creeper dolly. The set had about 8 inches of water in it. So we'll tie a cable to the creeper dolly. And then when the director says action, pull the cable underwater so the alligator's moving. And then one guy will just make the front legs move really, really fast and look like he's running. And it worked. And after that, the visual effects guys were from ILM. And when Spawn came up, which was their big movie because it was an ILM guys producing and directing, they called us and they said, the way you handled that, we realized we want to work with people that aren't going to say no, that are just going to come up with solutions. Because your job is, as any technician on a movie, your job is to realize the director's vision. And directors change their minds a lot. Unless you have a movie, like Sam Raimi is pretty good because Sam storyboards every single shot. Like on Army of Darkness, I have a book that thick. Wow. And we would literally just, okay, that's the shot we're doing. It has 6 deadites in it. Okay, go get 6 deadites. We're going to put them in the shot. Sam's very meticulous. But then you have other directors that are a little more organic and they kind of like to feel it as it's coming. So I've always prided myself on being a technician on set that can be flexible. When the director comes up with an idea, you'll have some directors that'll be planned every single shot. And then if you work with somebody like Quentin Tarantino, when we were doing Grindhouse, not Planetary, Death Proof.
Death Proof, yeah.
The script literally says, and then the 2 cars crash, and that was it. When it was Kurt Russell driving towards the girls. And I think there was one was like the tire rips a face off and then a leg flies out the window. But that was it. So, when you deal with directors and they write like that, they're not thinking in shots. They're thinking in the emotion of the moment. So it's my responsibility to be like, okay, now we have to figure out what the script means. So I remember talking to Quentin's assistant and said, I put 4 girls in a car and photograph what you think the angles will be. And they sent me a bunch of pictures. But what ended up happening is Quentin's the kind of guy that I would shoot tests, and then he'd be like, well, just shoot it like your test. Like when we did Inglourious Basterds, we did a scalping test. Peeled the skin off. So when it came time to shoot the movie, I flew to Berlin, and Quentin was like, okay, just show them how you did it. Because I wanted like Eli and Omar and all the actors they've been scalping people supposedly all this time, so I wanted them to start scalping people. And then when it came time to shoot the shot for the movie, Quentin's like, you just do it. You know how, you just shoot what you shot on the video. Oh, wow. So I directed that shot from Inglourious Basterds. But the thing is, then when we were doing Django, the real idea is, I would say, okay, there's a scene where they're torturing Jamie Foxx and he's like hanging upside down. And I was like, hey, how do you see? And he's like, Greg, I don't shoot that for a year. Like, I don't know what I don't know what it is yet until I've rehearsed with my actors. And at that point, I had already directed on The Walking Dead. So I thought, well, I'll just build what I think I would need as a director to accomplish what the script says. So when we came time to shoot that sequence, he came up to the shop and I said, okay, we have this, you can put the camera here, you can do this. So I was just sort of making suggestions for what the shots could be. And Quentin was like, great, okay, well, we'll just do that.
So there's a real kind of trust and chemistry factor between the director and yourself.
Yeah.
And once again, you are working for the director, working with the director, but you have to morph and evolve into whatever the director is looking for. I mean, that's a lot of trust and a lot of responsibility on your end.
And it's tricky. I'll never forget, I was working on Halloween 5, and we had a scene at the end of the movie, or at the end of the night, where I think Michael Myers kills 2 cops, and the cops are in the car, and their throats are slit. And the first AD came over and said, sun's coming up in 18 minutes, you gotta have it, the appliance glued on, blended, bloody in 12 minutes. So we did it, and then I remember going up and saying, hey, the cut's on this side, so maybe the camera should be over here, shooting through the driver's side window. And I walked away and I heard the director go, oh, what does he know? He's just the effects guy. I haven't heard from him much these days. But I remember thinking to myself, that's the wrong attitude, because the director is the composer. And imagine if you have the director as a composer, then your DP is the horn section, and your stunt people are the drums, and you have to be able to conduct everybody. So making a movie is you're a conductor, and you have to know when to rely on that instrument or that instrument or that instrument. And that's probably the best analogy that I can give, because when it plays harmoniously, it's beautiful. When everybody, complements each other's work, which is why you need to interact with props and costumes and everybody. And when it doesn't, then it doesn't work. A lot of people are like, oh, CG sucks, I'm like, look, CG is a tool just like any other, so CG is another one of those instruments. And when you balance it like Spielberg did in Jurassic Park, there are shots in there that animatronic, and my favorite shot in Jurassic Park is the camera's behind Steve Neal and Jeff Goldblum in the car, and the T-Rex head smashes the windshield. And then the T-Rex head leaves frame, and the CG T-Rex walks over to the other car where the kids are, all in one shot. And I'm like, brilliant, because the audience isn't thinking, oh, well, you just take the animatronic head out of the way and then you marry those two in one shot. But I love that shot. That's that's the way you use all of those tools.
I love the fact that, you mentioned Tarantino, for example, and it's like when Tarantino does a movie, he gets the band back together and you're part of his band. You do every single one of his films now.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, because you think of Greg Nicotero, obviously there's a lot of horror elements, but the Tarantino films are more action and that sort of a thing. So what kind of effects are you doing for him? Obviously Kill Bill is a lot of makeup and that sort of thing, but talk a little bit more about some of the effects you've done for Quentin.
Well, it's interesting because we worked with Scorsese too. We did Casino, and when you do stuff with Quentin, everybody thinks his movies are so gruesome. But if you really think about Reservoir Dogs, when Mike Madsen cuts the ear off, it's not even on camera.
Yeah, right.
He walks up to the guy, Mike Madsen walks up to the guy, and the camera pans away. So you don't even see the ear come off. And then he walks into the shot holding the ear. Hello. But the audience thinks that they saw it. And that, I remember, even Wes Craven was somebody, I think Wes had commented on how gruesome that shot was. And I'm like, you don't even see it. Yeah. You see the aftermath of the missing ear, and Quentin let your brain fill in the rest. Obviously the stuff on Kill Bill was way over the top, with all the blood sprays and all that kind of stuff, was always intended to be, his effects in his movie have a visceral impact. Even, I'll tell you another story. When we were doing Pulp Fiction, there's a scene when Sam Jackson and Travolta are driving in the car, and Marvin's in the back seat, and they turn around and blow his head off. In the original script, he doesn't blow his head off. He shoots him in the chest. And the guy's, and Sam Jackson's like, what'd you do? He's like, I didn't do anything. You hit a bump. I didn't bump. And they're arguing. And he's like, he's still alive. And they're like, what should we do? We should take him to the hospital. We can't take. And they're arguing with each other. And Phil Lamar's sitting in the back of the seat going, with blood gurgling out. And he's like, I don't know, I guess we're going to have to put him out of his misery. And he goes, you want to shoot him again? You already shot him once. So Travolta literally in the original script turns around and goes, Marvin, this is some shit, man. I'm really sorry. And he puts his hands over his eyes and shoots him. The day we get to set, Quentin's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I said, dude, I love that dialogue. That interaction was so cool. And he's like, yeah, but I want the audience to like Travolta. And if Travolta murders him versus accidentally shooting him, they'll react to him differently in the movie. So on the day, he's like, yeah, we're not going to do that. I was like, wow, okay. But again, I mean, that's just, that we were all ready to do it. I mean, we still blew the head out, but we just didn't have that prolonged shot in the chest and then shot in the head.
It's interesting, you've worked on a lot of Stephen King films. You mentioned Creepshow and Creepshow 2, and then there's Misery, and there's Green Mile, and The Mist. Is this something you just happen to get the job, or is Stephen requesting you, or because there's a lot of a pattern there?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I just the relationships I had with the people that were doing those movies, we did, I think a lot of it too, now that you're saying this, is, my relationship with George Romero, because George was supposed to direct Pet Sematary. Originally, it was going to be one of his movies after Day of the Dead. And I remember reading the script and was like, man, this is great. I loved the book Pet Sematary. I read it one day when I was a kid. I just couldn't put it down. But what ended up happening is we ended up working with people like Mick Garrison and Frank Darabont, and those guys were translating a lot of, I think I counted it not long ago, it's like 18 Stephen King.
Oh, really? That you worked on?
Because there's one like Riding the Bullet, Night Flyer, Desperation. There's stuff that I forgot about that movie. I forget about a lot of them until somebody reminds me. And then, of course, Green Mile and The Mist and, some of the bigger ones. But, I think Stephen's not as involved in terms of crewing up people. But, when we got the Creepshow TV show going, he was like, I got the perfect story for you. And I was like, oh my God, Stephen King's gonna, he's got and he gives me a story called Survivor Type. And it's about a guy who's shipwrecked on an island as big as this room, and has no food, can't get off the island, was smuggling heroin, and ends up cutting pieces of himself off and eating him slowly one by. And I'm thinking, okay, so I wrote the script. I adapted the short story and wrote the script. And then I'm like, we don't have the money to afford, we can't go to an island someplace. At one point I thought, well, maybe we just put green screen up in the parking lot of the studio and we just build the island. Because I was like, how am I going to tell Stephen King that we can't? So then when we started doing season 1 of Creepshow, I was like, there's no way we can afford to make this. So I called him and said, our budget's really low. And then he gave me, Gray Matter to adapt. So we adapted that instead. But then next season, I ended up doing animated Creepshow episodes and got Kiefer Sutherland to do the voice. And Kiefer's like, my first big job in Hollywood was Stand By Me. So he's like, this is a little full circle thing for me. Everybody's seen The Mist, right? I don't want to ruin it for anybody. But that scene in the end where they're sitting in the car and Tom Jane kills everybody and then gets out of the car, and then Melissa McBride comes driving by like, oh, she was the one that left and she survived. And it's funny because I read that script and my son was probably 2008. My son was 3 or 4 years old, and I got to the end and I was threw the script across the room. And I was like, my kid was almost the exact same age as the kid in the movie. And it was so disturbing for me. And I remember saying to Frank, like, dude, if you had kids, you would never write that ending because you could never imagine anybody being put in that situation. And then we went to the premiere in New York, and Steve King said, man, I would love that ending. I wish I would have thought of it. I would have put it in the short story. But it's super controversial. I think The Mist is very much like Carpenter's The Thing. I think that movie, because when The Thing came out, huge flop. Like, nobody saw it. It came out the same summer as E.T., and everyone's like, oh, we love E.T., but what about that thing, you know? And John told me many times the reason he directed Starman after was just as a to Hollywood to say, look, I'm a director. I can tell whatever type of story I want. I can tell an uplifting story if I want. I can tell a bleak story if I want. I can tell an action story. That's the story that I wanted to tell. That's the story that John chose. And it's, you know, The Thing is a masterpiece. It's one of the greatest genre movies of our generation. So I think The Mist is very similar to that, because that movie has the ensemble cast and the way that Frank Darabont, just like on Walking Dead, and The Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption, when Frank puts these ensemble casts together, they're unbelievable, and you can't beat them. But, you know, that was just at a time when people didn't want to watch bleak movies. But I think that movie has stood up to the test of time.
Absolutely, I agree. Let's talk about your directing experiences as well. Starting on Walking Dead, obviously one of the big hits, due a lot to your effects and how you guys were able to make the zombies and all that sort of thing. What made you start branching out into directing some of those episodes?
Well, you know, what's interesting is a lot of times when you're an effects guy, you could either be a stunt coordinator or an effects guy. Sometimes what happens is you have lots of inserts that are needed for sequences. So the director will come in and he'll shoot the main part of the sequence. And then sometimes the director will move on to another scene, and then a second unit comes in and they do pickups of, we need a close-up of that bottle of water, or we need this. And sometimes effects take a little bit longer to set up, stunts take a little bit longer to set up. So traditionally what they'll do is the director will leave the unit with either the makeup effects guy or stunt guy. And a lot of times, like, a lot of stunt coordinators are second unit directors. If you watch like any of like the Raiders of the Lost Ark movies and a lot of that kind of stuff, you realize that, you know, Spielberg directed a lot of it, but like a lot of those stunts, when, you know, Indiana Jones is underneath the car being dragged by the truck with the bullwhip, second unit guys shot all that stuff. You don't think about it, but, you know, we all work together as a unit. So I had been doing a lot of that kind of stuff for other directors. Like when we shot The Faculty, the scene at the end of The Faculty when Elwood's running underneath the bleachers and the creature's chasing him and the bleachers are closing and the creature gets pinned, I directed a lot of those inserts of the creature there. And then when the creature, like the worms shoot out and go into Elijah's face and all this kind of stuff, that was all shot. Robert wasn't even there. He was on another stage shooting stuff. So I ended up getting to the point where I started directing pickups and things. I shot second unit on The Mist as well. So I was basically Frank's guy. So when Walking Dead came up, we got to season 2 and I had directed a short film and Frank's like, okay, you're ready. You want to direct an episode? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, do you want to direct a zombie heavy episode or a zombie light episode? I'm like, that's a trick question. I don't know. So I kind of said to him, well, look, I know how to make the zombie stuff, so give me a zombie light episode. So the episode that I directed was in season 2 when Dale gets killed on the farm by one zombie.
Wow.
That was my first episode. So my process then, because I'd never done anything like that before, and I read the script and I'm like, okay, what's the theme of this? So one theme was it's 12 angry men, because there's the big tribunal. They're all sitting in Herschel's house trying to decide what to do with Randall, because should they kill him or should they let him go? And if they let him go, that they're jeopardizing. So I was like watching all these movies to get inspiration. And then that episode, again, you know, like the shot where Daryl comes up and aims the gun at the camera and says, bro, I'm so sorry, and shoots Jeff DeMunn and kills him. And that episode there's so much emotion and there's so much going on. If you haven't watched that episode, I think it's episode 11 in season 2, it's one of the best because there's so much happening. You know, it opens with Daryl beating Randall, trying to get information from him, and it's so freaking good. And that was the first episode I ever directed. And then by season 2, they're like, you need to direct more episodes. And but I remember I had little charts, like, everybody does their shot lists differently, but what I would do is I'd take a schematic of the set and I would block it in my head, like, okay, Rick comes in here and he stands here, and Laurie comes in here and Shane comes in here. So I need a camera to film over her shoulder to him. And so I came in with these little blueprints with little cameras drawn all over them. The camera guys were like, you're so cute. Look at your adorable little drawings. You're just so adorable. And they all thought I was so adorable because I had my little drawings. And I was like, okay, today, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put the camera here. And then but that was how I could tell the story visually was I needed to see where they were going to go. And then, of course, the trick with being a director is you think, okay, well, I want him to come in that door and sit in that chair. And then you go, all right, let's rehearse. And the actor comes in that door and sits in this chair. And you're like, son of a bitch, you didn't sit in the chair I want. And I'm like, why would you not? Well, why would I sit in that chair? And then you have a 3-hour argument with the actors.
Right. Damn.
Well, I like this chair better. Well, but I want you to sit in that chair. Well, my character wouldn't sit in that chair. Sit in the chair. It's that kind of stuff. So what you can never, again, this is all for future directors. Never tell, there's 3 things to never tell an actor. Can you do it faster? Because we were on set one day and I was watching another director direct a scene with Scott Wilson and Jeff DeMunn. And the director came in and said, hey, can you speed it up? Because the scene's taking a long time. And they're like, well, to talk faster? Like, why would we speed up? We're having a conversation. So you can never tell them. The trick would be, hey, let's take a little air out of it. Yeah. And then they're like, oh yeah, and then they do it. But if you tell them to speed up, bad answer. And then there was another time where one of the actors was late to set, and I was like, shit, we're gonna be late, so let's just block the scene. And then when the actor shows up, we'll just tell them where their marks are because we're behind. And so we block the scene. Actor's supposed to go there. And actor comes on set. And I go, okay, so on action, you're going to come in here. She said, can we just do it once and let me feel it where I need to go? And I was like, okay, but I hope you stand there. So it's interesting because, actors work from a different place. Actors don't really think about hitting their marks, or they don't think about the technical aspects of it. They think about the emotional aspect of what would their character do. Andy Lincoln, when we shot the scene with Negan, where they're gonna, cut, they killed Glenn is dead, Abraham's dead, and Rick is just broken. I had the editors told me I shot more footage in that scene than any other director in the history of the show. And I said, well, I have 9 characters on their knees and 1 character standing up above them with a bat. I don't want to put them emotionally through that scene 700 times. So we need more cameras so I can shoot less takes, but capture the reaction of it. And because it's, after a while, the actors, if they give you everything they have in take 1, by take 5, they're gone. They're like a husk of emotions. So you have to be smart about, how you do that kind of stuff.
Very interesting. Going back to the effects, you mentioned before how you like the shot in Jurassic Park that was a combination of CGI and practical. Do you prefer one over the other as a makeup artist?
Well, look, when we were doing Walking Dead, the second episode, we had a scene where, okay, Rick's hiding under the tank. Glenn comes in and goes, hey, dumbass, what are you doing under the tank? And then Glenn comes in and saves him, and they run down the street and run away from the zombies. So we had prepared to do blood hits on the zombies in the street. We would put a tube up in the hair and do it practically, where we would just blow the blood out of the back of the head. And then somebody said, well, okay, so what about take 2? Well, take 2, you got to go in, you got to clean all the blood, you got to change the wardrobe. And they're like, well, we don't have time to do that. Well, how are we going to do that? And I was like, well, we ended up realizing that for a lot of the head hits on Walking Dead, we ended up having them, they needed to be digital because then you didn't have to clean it up. You didn't have to, if you needed to take two, everybody would just get back up and go to their first position and shoot it again. We did some, like there's a great scene in episode 1 of Walking Dead where Morgan's upstairs and he sees his dead wife walking towards him and he's like weeping uncontrollably with the gun trying to shoot her, which is one of the scenes that put The Walking Dead on the map, was that scene. And there's a close-up of one of the zombies where he shoots the whole back of the, that was right out of Dawn of the Dead. So we had rigs that we built, but then as the show progressed, we're like, well, we don't physically have the time to cut and do another wardrobe change, and clean up the blood. So we ended up starting to do the head hits with CGI. And what we ended up doing was we would hang up a black duvetine, and then we had air mortars, and we put milk in them. And we would shoot milk out of air mortars because the milk has a weird viscosity to it where it's stringy when you shoot it in slow motion. Like if you just did water would turn into little pellets, little droplets. But if you did milk, so we were shooting blood elements in front of black, and then digitally they would change the color, and then we would put those elements onto the zombie heads in the shot. So we were still creating practical pieces that were then put digitally onto the zombie heads.
It's amazing. It's amazing to do that. Yeah. As we start to wind down, is there like some younger special effects guys that you have your eye on? Obviously, Tom Savini begat Greg Nicotero. Is there some other guys that you are appreciative of?
Yeah, Vincent Van Dyke is excellent. I mean, I consider him, he's younger than me, so I consider him sort of a different, the next generation past me. There's a guy named Mike Marino who lives in New York who did Penguin. He did Colin Farrell's makeup, and the guy's a brilliant makeup artist. And I admire him a lot. And it's funny because then I meet these guys and they're like, oh my God, you're Greg Nicotero. I'm like, dude, you're awesome. What are you talking about? So those guys I really dig a lot. I got to work with Vincent a little bit, and then Mike and I just have become friends recently. And
it's amazing how things have transpired with technology, like doing the Terrifier films, which are all practical effects that Damien did. Before you would do the mold of a face, now it's just a scan. Talk about some of the technology that's made things a little bit easier for you.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, the digital technology of being able to scan something. I'll tell you a story. We're working on 2 of the Walking Dead spinoffs, Dead City and Daryl Dixon. In Dead City, they're like, hey, we need a preemie baby because there's a character in the show that has a baby prematurely, and we need a really realistic baby. So we went into our storage and we have molds, and I sent them pictures. I'm like, well, here's one that we made, for like The Practice or LA Law or some shit like that. I don't remember. I'm like, well, here's pictures of one. And they're like, we don't really like the face. We want the face to look different. So they sent me a picture. And I was like, well, okay, well, let me think about it. And then the next day the guy called and said, okay, it shoots in a week. And I was like, oh shit. So we literally modeled it digitally, and then instead of printing the baby, we printed the reverse negative mold of the baby. So within 4 days, we had the mold that we could pour silicone into, and we delivered the baby in a week. And that, look, I'm an old school guy. I love pushing clay around, and I love that aspect of it. But productions and physical production, in terms of money and time, you get less money and you get less time every single time. So you got to figure out ways to roll with it. And in that particular instance, I'm like, well, I have an obligation to production. So we literally ended up modeling it and then doing the inverse and building the mold around it, and poured silicone in the mold with an armature and sent it to them. And they were like, how did you do that so fast? Like, well, you didn't give me any choice. I had to figure out a way. So that kind of stuff, like when actors love it, even though they're afraid you're going to steal their soul. They're like, you can't sell our images. I'm like, I'm just making a fake head, bro. Like, relax. But they were, the whole actors strike was all about that. Like, who owns the rights to that stuff? And But now, like, you can have an actor come to your studio and they're there for 20 minutes. Yeah. And you take pictures of them and you take color samples and hair tracing and you scan them and then you're done. And you could scan them in 4 or 5 different expressions and then have the show photos to the director. Which expression do you like? That one. Okay, great. And then that's the one you make. So it really has sped up the manufacturing process, and it gives you a lot more freedom to do it. But, pretty soon then they'll be like, well, why do we need that? Why don't we just do it CG? Why do we have to? So, there's always that balance. But, look, I have a big collection of props and things that I've collected over the years that are part of my collection. Like I have the crate from Creepshow, and I have some really cool things in my personal collection. And I think now, now anybody can make anything. Like I have a friend who's a young kid who's like printing full-size stormtrooper armor, and it's amazing. And I'm like, but then anybody can do it, which is very cool. But then it's like it takes a little bit of the specialness out of it because now it's just everybody can have one. But like as an example, the exhibit, if any of you guys get to LA and you get to the Motion Picture Academy Jaws exhibit, there's a giant exhibit of all the, memorabilia and props and stuff from Jaws. Then I built with my team, I built a quarter scale 6-foot shark that you can go and operate. And the mouth opens and closes and the tail moves. And we took the digital scan of the full-size shark and we just scaled it to quarter scale. And then we printed it. And then we molded it, and then So in that instance, I wanted the shark to be 100% accurate to the real shark from the movie because it was important. And so that one is. You look at it, and it looks exactly like the shark from Jaws. So a lot of times, like if you have to play with scale or something like that, that stuff is the greatest because you could sculpt a head, and then the director's like, it's too big. I think it needs to be like 20% smaller. Instead of having to re-sculpt the whole thing and remold it, you can just scale it in the computer and print it 20% smaller and you're done.
Last few questions for you, Greg. Your filmography is unbelievable, just how many great movies you've worked on. Is there a few of them that you feel that are a little bit underrated from an effects standpoint that you're very proud of that maybe didn't get the props that you thought should? Predators, I think, is a really underrated movie. It's very much a remake of the original Predator, if you really think about it. But I think that movie's really underrated. I think it's really fun. Walt Goggins is in it, and Adrian Brody. It's a really, and Mahershala Ali is in it. There's a lot of great actors in that movie. I like that movie a lot. I mean, The Mist, I think, is an underrated movie just because a lot of people haven't seen it. You did such a great job with the giant spiders.
Because
I've never been a fan of spiders, and that always freaked me out reading it, and just seeing how you guys did it, you really nailed it.
Well, and the wild thing was there's a great scene where one of the soldiers is in the web and he falls and hits the ground and his body explodes and like thousands of spiders.
That's so gross, yeah.
And we built a body of him that had little triggers on the chest. So when the body fell and hit the ground, the chest would flower open. And we did that part practically, and then the VFX added all the little baby spiders in there. But yeah, I mean, I'd have to think. I'm sure there's a lot of movies out there that I'm not remembering.
Let's talk about some of your favorite effects. There's two for me. One is the hobbling in Misery.
Yep.
Still grosses me out. If you guys have ever seen that, it basically takes a sledgehammer and whacks the guy's ankles, they just break. And then also Hostel with the Achilles cutting.
Yeah. I mean, I would add to that, I would say when Pesci crushes the guy's head in Casino and the eyeball pops out. That was a good one. I like that one. And it's funny because I called my dad because my dad's a doctor. I'm like, Dad, so what would happen if they crushed the skull? Would the eyeball come out? And he's like, no, it's still attached. It wouldn't come out. It would just, when the skull fractures, the pressure would just push the eye up in that socket. So that's what we did. I mean, all the stuff in Casino I love. Like the dummy we did of Joe Pesci when they're burying him alive. You know, that was a dummy that it was really wild because we shot that outside of Las Vegas and went to set. They had the graves already dug. And I remember saying to Scorsese, like, weren't you worried when you started digging this grave that you were going to find a real grave of like some bad wise guys that have been buried in the desert outside? I wouldn't touch that shit. And then we put the body in, and then we would pour blood on it, and then we would shoot a take. And then it was so cool because Marty's like, everybody come here, look, Greg, make it move. And the arms are moving, and we had a tube in the mouth, so when they threw the dirt in, we would blow the dirt out of the mouth. It looked like he was coughing. And we did it like 4 or 5 times, but every time we did another take, it was the blood and the mud were mixing under the body, so it was like quicksand. So when we wrapped, I remember getting out of the car and walking through the lobby of the hotel in Vegas covered in mud and blood, like up to here. And I thought to myself, like, nobody even batted an eye. They're like, oh, they killed another guy in the desert out there. Hey, do you need some room service? No, I'm fine, thanks. Me like blood everywhere. So yeah, I mean, you know, every movie is different, and I think that's the most exciting part of my career is that I've gotten to do so many different, you know, like City Slickers. We did the birth of the little calf, you know, the little Norman calf that everyone's like, oh, it's so sweet. And I remember when we did it, we made a little fake calf, and we made the private parts of the cow. And the idea was that Billy Crystal or I forget, Jack Palance or somebody pulls the calf out. And then at one point we're like, wait a minute, why don't we just put a real calf in there? So we slimed up the whole tube and we put a real calf in. So when they reach in, they pull a real calf out. And I want to say it was either Billy Crystal or Danny Stern or somebody did an interview where he said that we put a real calf in a real cow's vagina for the shot. And Arnold did the same thing when we did Eraser and was talking about, you know, when he shoots the glass out and the alligators are there. Arnold's like, it was real alligators. And they got loose on the set and it was... Meanwhile, I'm like, first of all, that never happened. Second of all, the real wrangler for the alligators is going to get sued because somebody will watch the credits and be like, well, I ain't hiring that guy. He let his alligators loose on the set. So but you know, look, Arnold's trying to get people in the theaters. You know, that's how that's how you sell stuff.
Last question for you, Greg. Do you have an all-time favorite effect that you've done?
Oh, that's such a hard question.
Is there a few of them?
It's really a hard question. I mean, the bicycle girl in The Walking Dead, I think, is really meaningful to me because when AMC was promoting The Walking Dead, that was the first photo that they released, was that zombie. And people didn't know how we did it. Like, they were like, was it a puppet? Was it an animatronic? Did they bury her legs? How did they...
What was the zombie doing? Riding the bike? I don't remember.
No, it was, she's laying... She didn't have any legs, so that would have been a little hard. Okay. She's laying on her stomach, and Rick walks up and she rolls over and it's like a half zombie. It's the first episode.
Gotcha.
And I'm super proud of that because I feel like that put the show on the map. And again, one of those moments that redefined the zombie genre because Rick later goes back to that park and sees the zombie still crawling along and goes up and says, I'm sorry this happened to you, and puts her out of her misery. That's not a zombie movie. You don't go and kill a zombie and put it out of its misery. So what Frank Darabont did in that scene was humanized the zombies. And I think that did a lot for the show. I love Sin City. I love the makeup we did on Mickey Rourke for Marv. I love... there's so many. Like it's so many that it's hard for me. I have to like literally look at a list and be like, oh yeah, that was good. Oh yeah, I love that. Spawn was great. John Leguizamo and the clown makeup. He was awesome in that movie. And again, you need great actors to bring great makeups to life. That's why, Amadeus works so well and The Exorcist works so well, because these actors bring it to life. You can have the greatest makeup in the world and you put it on somebody and they don't emote through the makeup, then you don't have a character.
Amazing conversation, Greg. Thank you so much, man.
I did all the talking. I feel bad. You should.
No, you're the guest, Greg Nicotero.
Thank you. All right, next time I'll interview you. How's that?
Please, I'll be ready. We'll come back.
Everybody, thank you for coming. Have a great night.